In this video, we'll have a chat about cloud concepts. Cloud computing is interesting because really we're using technological solutions that we've already had for a while. We're just using them in a different way. Cloud computing has a number of characteristics, one of which is on demand and self service. This means that at any time, we should be able to connect over the internet, for example, to some kind of a web interface and provision resources as needed. So, for example, if I need more cloud storage because I've run out of space, I should be able to provision that immediately. The next characteristic is broad network access. We should be able to connect from anywhere over the internet, pretty much using any type of device, whether it's an app on a smartphone or using a web browser on a desktop computer to provision and work with cloud services. Resource pooling refers to the fact that cloud providers have the infrastructure. They've got virtualization servers that can run virtual machines. They've got all the network switching and routing equipment and firewall equipment, VPN equipment, storage arrays that we can provision using easy to navigate web interfaces. So all of the cloud customers, or tenants as they're called, are essentially sharing from this resource pool. Rapid elasticity refers to the fact that we can provision as well as deprovision cloud services as needed. So, in our previous example, where we need more cloud storage, either personally or even at the enterprise level, we can expand that storage immediately. In the same way, we can reduce that service as we don't need it. Another way to look at it is with virtual machines. If I need to test something on a server operating system, I could spin up a virtual machine in the cloud in minutes. And then when I'm finished testing, deprovision it so I don't get charged for it anymore. So, measured service is a big part of cloud computing where all of our utilization of IT resources is measured. So, the amount of traffic into or out of a specific cloud service, you might be charged a fee. You might also be charged for how much storage space you're using. Certainly, if you're running virtual machines in the cloud, you're paying while they're running. Often you pay by the hour, in some cases, maybe by the minute. Certainly, if you're running database instances in the cloud, you're being charged. It's absolutely crucial that when you don't need a service in the cloud that you deprovision it, because otherwise you could get a nasty surprise at the end of the month when you look at the bill for your usage. Cloud computing also includes different categories of services. For example, IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service. And of course, this is going to include things like storage and virtual machines and so on. Platform as a Service, or PaaS, includes things like specific operating system platforms and database platforms and developer platforms that we can use in the cloud instead of having that on our own network. Software as a Service, or SaaS, deals with software that users can interact with, where really most of the work is done by the provider. Think of things like cloud based email or cloud based office productivity tools like Google Docs or Microsoft Office 365. Those are SaaS. We'll talk about those more in another video. Cloud computing implies virtualization. Virtual machines are being used. Now, in some cases with some cloud providers, when you provision resources, let's say you provision a Microsoft SQL Server database in the cloud or a MySQL database, you might not see the intricacies related to the virtual machine that runs your database, but it is running in a virtual machine instance. Now, even though cloud computing implies virtualization, the opposite is not true. So, just because you might be using virtual machines on your corporate on premises network, that doesn't mean you've got a private cloud. Because we have to think about all the characteristics that we talked about when we began this discussion. Things like broad network access, rapid elasticity, and so on. SDN stands for Software Defined Networking, and this is a big deal with cloud computing. Now, if you think of an on-premises network, if you want to add another network or a subnet, then normally what you'll do is physically get more cables, maybe another switch. You might even configure a VLAN within your switch. In the cloud, we just use a nice, easy to work with interface, a web page, and it will modify underlying network infrastructure owned by the cloud provider to provision things like VPNs or subnets that run in the cloud. That's software-defined networking. Virtualization, as we said, doesn't imply cloud computing. In order to have a cloud, whether it's a private cloud on your on premises equipment that you control and own, or in the public cloud, you've got to meet all of those cloud characteristics that we discussed at the beginning of this chat. Private clouds mean that we have those characteristics on company-controlled infrastructure. Public cloud, of course, means it's on cloud provider infrastructure. Availability is very important because when you think about cloud computing, especially public cloud computing, you're really trusting somebody else to host potentially crucial IT services. And you've got a network connection that you need to have up and running to get to those services. So we either connect over the internet or through a dedicated leased line, which doesn't use the internet, from our on premises network to the cloud. We could also have a site to site VPN, essentially a VPN tunnel between our network and the public cloud provider. Certainly, we should have redundant internet connections. For instance, if we're using the internet, in case one connection goes down, we still need to be able to make a connection to our IT services running in the cloud in some other way. Then there's data replication. Now, we could replicate data within provider data centers. This is common with public cloud providers. For redundancy and availability of your data, they'll replicate it between different data centers, and in some cases, even between different regions within a country. Now, you may or may not pay an extra fee for that redundancy. It really depends on the cloud provider. But that is an option. Now, this provides high availability. The other aspect related to this is that we, as IT and server people for on-premises networks, we can also configure replication from on-premises data sources to the cloud as well for high availability. That could also be in the form of cloud backup. In this video, we discussed cloud concepts.